On September the 8th, 2022, Queen Elizabeth II died at Balmoral after a reign of more than 70 years. Within hours, alongside the official announcements, photographs, condolences, arguments about monarchy, and memories of a life lived almost entirely in public, an old story began circulating again. It was not a new allegation. It had been repeated for decades, usually as a joke, sometimes as a meme, and sometimes with complete seriousness. The claim was that Queen Elizabeth II was not entirely human. According to one of the strangest conspiracy theories of the modern era, she belonged to a hidden bloodline of reptilian beings capable of appearing human while secretly influencing the world. There is no credible biological, genetic, photographic, or documentary evidence that Queen Elizabeth was a reptilian shapeshifter. Nothing in the public record supports that claim, and yet simply dismissing the story as nonsense leaves a surprisingly interesting question untouched. Where did it actually come from? Not where did the image of a snake-headed monarch come from in mythology? Or why do people make jokes about powerful leaders being cold-blooded? The more precise question is this: how did one specific 20th century idea connect the British royal family, extraterrestrials, ancient civilizations, secret bloodlines, underground worlds, New Age spirituality, alleged ritual abuse, and a former BBC sports presenter into a single story that millions of people eventually recognized? The answer does not begin with Queen Elizabeth. It does not begin at Buckingham Palace. It does not begin with a leaked document, a hidden photograph, a scientist, or an eyewitness whose account can be independently verified. It begins with a collection of ideas that were already drifting through popular culture long before Elizabeth became the most famous face attached to them. And when those pieces finally came together in the 1990s, the result was stranger than the internet version usually suggests. The modern form of the theory is inseparable from one man, David Icke. Before becoming one of the world's most recognizable conspiracy writers, Icke had been a professional football goalkeeper, a sports journalist, a BBC sports presenter, and a spokesman for Britain's Green Party. In other words, he did not enter public life as an obscure occult writer. He had a recognizable television career and a familiar face. That mattered later because when his beliefs changed dramatically, the transformation happened in public. In 1990 and 1991, Icke began describing a spiritual awakening. He later said that he had visited a psychic named Betty Shine and had come to believe that he had a special purpose. He traveled to Peru and described powerful personal experiences there. He began wearing turquoise, which he associated with positive energy. Then, on April 29th, 1991, he appeared on the BBC talk show Wogan. The interview became one of the most famous moments of his life. Icke spoke with extraordinary certainty about spiritual messages and predicted major geological catastrophes. The studio audience laughed. Host Terry Wogan eventually told him, in a line that would follow Icke for years, that the audience was laughing at him rather than with him. But here is the first important correction to the story people often tell today. The reptilian theory did not simply appear during that television breakdown of normal expectations. Icke did not sit on Wogan in 1991 and announce that Queen Elizabeth was a lizard. The fully developed reptilian thesis came later. That gap matters because it shows that the idea evolved. It was assembled gradually, through books, subcultures, spiritual beliefs, older conspiracy narratives, UFO literature, and testimony that cannot be independently confirmed. If you enjoy investigations like this, where a famous claim is less interesting than the trail of ideas that created it, subscribe to Mr. Occultus. Mustiki. Supporting the channel helps us keep making long, quiet documentaries that follow the evidence without asking you to believe the theory. After the Wogan appearance, Icke spent years developing a much larger worldview, his early spiritual optimism increasingly mixed with a darker form of conspiracism. By the middle of the 1990s, his books described hidden elites manipulating governments, finance, media, and political conflict. He adopted the familiar language of the Illuminati and the New World Order. He argued that apparently opposing institutions could sometimes serve the same hidden interests. He popularized his own phrase, problem, reaction, solution, to describe what he believed was a method of manufacturing crises and then offering predetermined answers. This phase is essential because the reptilians were not originally the whole theory. They became an answer to a problem inside the theory. If an invisible network really controlled so much of human civilization, what could possibly unify it across nations, generations, political systems, and centuries? Normal conspiracies require meetings, incentives, secrets, rivalries, and human mistakes. A super conspiracy needs something larger. It needs a force that does not age like ordinary institutions that can supposedly operate across bloodlines, and that can explain why the same patterns appear to survive changes in government and ideology. By 1996, Icke was already moving toward a reptilian explanation. In his book, I Am Me, I Am Free, he referred to an account involving the apparent transformation of a person into something lizard-like and wondered whether reptile-like extraterrestrials might somehow manifest in human form. He wrote that the subject sounded fantastic, but that he wanted to investigate it further. That passage is significant because it captures the theory before it became complete. The reptilians were still a question inside a larger conspiracy system. Then came The Biggest Secret, published in 1999. This was the book that turned a strange possibility into a total cosmology. In it, Icke argued that a hidden ruling network was descended from reptilian extraterrestrial beings. These entities, he claimed, could appear in human form, operate through hereditary bloodlines, and manipulate civilization from behind political, religious, financial, and royal institutions. He connected them with the Anunnaki of his version of ancient Mesopotamian history, and also described them as interdimensional, existing beyond ordinary human perception. This is the point where Queen Elizabeth enters the popular version of the story. The British royal family became one of Icke's most famous examples of what he called reptilian bloodlines. But even here, the story is often retold backwards. People searching for the origin of the Queen Elizabeth claim tend to imagine that someone first accused the Queen of being non-human, and Icke then built a theory around it. The documentary trail suggests something closer to the opposite. Icke already had a developing reptilian framework. During the years in which The Biggest Secret was being written, he encountered people whose unverified claims gave that framework specific names, places, and royal characters. Religious studies scholar David G. Robertson, who examined the development of Icke's thought in detail, identifies three major influences on the reptilian synthesis in The Biggest Secret. Zecharia Sitchin's ancient astronaut narrative, stories associated with the South African writer and traditional healer Credo Mutwa, and allegations made by a woman known publicly as Arizona Wilder. Robertson specifically notes that Wilder's account supplied Icke with much of the material identifying members of the British royal family as reptilians. That distinction is crucial. Arizona Wilder's statements were allegations. They were not verified eyewitness evidence, and no independent record has established the extraordinary events she described. Her claims included supposed secret rituals involving powerful public figures and physical transformations into reptilian forms. They arrived during a period when claims about hidden ritual abuse networks had already circulated widely in North America and Britain. Many such stories were part of what later became known as the Satanic Panic, an era in which dramatic allegations about organized ritual abuse spread through media, therapy culture, religious communities, and conspiracy literature, despite a lack of evidence for the vast secret networks being described. Icke also promoted another story that gave the royal reptilian narrative enormous emotional power, because it involved Diana, Princess of Wales. He said that a woman named Christine Fitzgerald, described by him as a friend and confidant of Diana, had told him that Diana referred to the Windsors as the lizards or the reptiles, and said, "They are not human." The statement became one of the most repeated lines in the entire mythology. But there is a major evidentiary problem. We do not have a recording of Diana making that statement. Pesitoba, we do not have a document written by Diana establishing that she literally believed the royal family were extraterrestrial reptiles. We have Icke's account of what Fitzgerald allegedly told him. Even if Diana ever used language like lizards, that would not establish that she meant it biologically. People frequently describe distant, unemotional, cruel, or powerful people with animal metaphors. The jump from an alleged nickname to extraterrestrial genetics is not evidence. It is interpretation layered on testimony, layered on a private conversation. This is where the investigation becomes more interesting than the claim. If the Queen Elizabeth reptilian theory had begun with a piece of physical evidence, we could examine the evidence. If it had begun with a royal document, we could authenticate the document. If it had begun with a photograph, we could inspect the original image. But its royal branch grows from a network of stories in which the strongest claims depend on people reporting what they saw, what they were told, what someone else supposedly said, or what they believed they remembered. The theory becomes harder to falsify precisely because the decisive evidence is always located somewhere beyond public verification. And yet the reptilian idea itself was older than Icke's royal allegations. Much older. One of the strangest parts of the genealogy is that the modern reptilian conspiracy did not emerge from one clean tradition. It is more like a river formed by many smaller streams. Some came from occultism, some came from science fiction, some came from UFO culture, some came from ancient astronauts speculation, some came from older religious images of serpents, demons, hidden underground beings, and corrupt bloodlines. Some came from 20th century fears about secret governments. By the time Icke assembled his version, many of the ingredients were already available. Consider the underground world. In 1871, British novelist Edward Bulwer Lytton published The Coming Race, a work of fiction about an advanced subterranean people called the Vrilya. They were not Icke's Reptilians, and treating the novel as a direct blueprint would be misleading. But the book helped popularize a recurring modern image, another civilization existing beneath ours, technologically or spiritually superior, hidden in places ordinary people cannot reach. Late 19th and early 20th century esoteric movements added their own subterranean geographies. Theosophical writers imagined hidden masters, lost civilizations, secret passages, and ancient wisdom preserved outside normal history. These ideas were not one coherent doctrine, but they created a cultural vocabulary in which unseen advanced beings could exist alongside humanity while remaining inaccessible to conventional institutions. Then, in January 1934, the Los Angeles Times reported an extraordinary local story. A mining engineer named G. Warren Shufelt was searching beneath Los Angeles for what he believed was a lost underground city. According to the story he promoted, a Native American informant had described an ancient people associated with lizards who had supposedly retreated underground after a catastrophe. Shufelt looked for tunnels and golden tablets said to contain information about human origins. No lost reptilian city was discovered. But the episode is remarkable because it contains several motifs that later appear in modern reptilian mythology: hidden subterranean spaces, ancient technology, secret knowledge about human origins, and lizard-like beings living out of sight. That does not mean David Icke copied a 1934 newspaper article and turned the Queen into a reptile. The more interesting point is that the imaginative architecture already existed. The hidden civilization, the underground refuge, the ancient knowledge, the non-human intelligence, the idea that mainstream history is missing an entire layer beneath the surface. The pattern continued in the 1940s with what became known as the Shaver mystery. Writer Richard Shaver and editor Raymond Palmer published stories in Amazing Stories involving underground beings, ancient machinery, telepathic interference, and hidden forces affecting life on the surface. Readers debated whether the material was fiction, revelation, or something in between. Occult writer Maurice Doreal also wrote about serpent-like beings and subterranean mysteries. In this environment, the boundary between pulp fiction, occult teaching, personal testimony, and alleged hidden history became unusually porous. That porous boundary matters. A fictional image can inspire an occult interpretation. An occult interpretation can later be cited as an ancient teaching. A claimed ancient teaching can be treated by a later writer as independent confirmation of a modern conspiracy. After enough repetition, the original source can disappear from view. What remains is the impression that many traditions, separated by centuries, all independently described the same hidden beings, but sometimes they did not independently describe the same thing. Sometimes later, writers were reading earlier writers. By the post-war period, UFO culture added another layer. Flying saucers, alien contactees, secret bases, government cover-ups, underground installations, and extraterrestrial races began to merge with older occult ideas. The beings beneath the earth could now be beings from other planets. The hidden masters could become extraterrestrials. Ancient gods could become visitors from space. The mythology was becoming technologically modern without losing its spiritual structure. And then television supplied an image so perfect that it is almost impossible to ignore. In 1983, NBC aired the miniseries V. Its apparently human visitors were secretly reptilian aliens wearing human-looking disguises. The story was deliberately political. Its creators used the alien occupation as an allegory of fascism, but whatever its intended message, millions of viewers saw a powerful visual concept. The friendly public figure whose human face conceals a reptile. There is no need to claim that V caused David Icke's theory. The evidence does not establish that simple line. What V proves is something subtler. By the 1980s, the exact visual grammar of reptilian infiltration was already circulating in mainstream culture. Human appearance, hidden reptile, political deception, secret takeover, collaboration by insiders, resistance by those who can see what others cannot. And the 1990s then supplied the final ingredients with remarkable speed. Writers in the UFO and conspiracy world were already discussing reptilian extraterrestrials before The Biggest Secret appeared. Valdemar Valerian's Matrix 2, published in 1990, described reptilian beings among multiple extraterrestrial races. By 1994, John Rhodes had created an online presence dedicated to what he called reptoids. Arthur Horn's 1994 book, Humanity's Extraterrestrial Origins, argued that the Anunnaki were reptilian extraterrestrials. Other writers connected reptilians with underground bases, mind control, secret governments, and the Illuminati. By 1997, material circulating on early internet sites described reptilian beings occupying subterranean complexes and cooperating with hidden political powers. In other words, the Queen Elizabeth reptilian theory was born at exactly the moment when several previously separate worlds were colliding. New Age spirituality, UFO lore, anti-government conspiracy culture, ancient astronaut speculation, apocalyptic belief, personal testimony, and the early internet. And this is where Zecharia Sitchin enters the story. Sitchin was one of the most influential ancient astronaut writers of the late 20th century. Beginning with the 12th Planet in 1976, he argued that ancient Mesopotamian texts described extraterrestrial beings called the Anunnaki, who had come to Earth and influenced human civilization. His interpretations are not accepted by mainstream Assyriology. His reconstruction of Mesopotamian language and astronomy has been heavily criticized. Importantly, Sitchin's original Anunnaki were not simply Icke's shape-shifting royal reptiles. That transformation occurred through later synthesis. Icke took the idea of ancient extraterrestrial intervention and connected it to a hereditary ruling network. Other writers supplied the reptilian identity. Still others supplied stories of underground civilizations, occult ritual, altered states, bloodlines, and shape-changing. The result was not the discovery of one ancient secret. It was a modern collage that made older material appear as though every fragment had always belonged to the same picture. If you value this kind of slow reconstruction, separating what a theory claims from where each piece actually entered the story, subscribe to Mr. Occultus. The goal here is not to make the impossible sound true. It is to understand why an impossible story could become culturally durable. The influence of Credo Mutwa shows how complicated that process can become. Mutwa was a South African writer and traditional healer who told elaborate stories involving ancient beings and extraterrestrial encounters. Icke later presented conversations with him as confirmation of reptilian themes. But scholars who have studied Mutwa's work caution against treating his accounts as straightforward records of ancient Zulu Zulu tradition. Some of his stories were highly individual, shaped by modern esoteric and UFO ideas, as well as African religious material. When such stories are presented to a Western audience as ancient confirmation, the timeline can become reversed. A modern synthesis starts looking ancient because the modern elements have been wrapped in the authority of tradition. That reversal is one of the most important mechanisms in the reptilian story. The argument often works like this. Ancient cultures depicted serpents. Therefore, they knew about reptilian beings. Religious texts mention dragons or serpent figures. Therefore, they describe the same entities. Myths contain gods descending from the sky. Therefore, those gods were extraterrestrials. Royal families care about lineage. Therefore, the bloodline must preserve non-human genetics. Powerful institutions use symbols. Therefore, the symbols reveal the hidden species behind them. Each step converts resemblance into identity. A snock symbol becomes a biological reptile. A myth becomes a historical report. A ritual becomes evidence of a hidden race. A family tree becomes a genetic program. A metaphor becomes an eyewitness statement. And because each individual step can feel small, the enormous conclusion can arrive without the viewer noticing how many assumptions were added along the way. This also helps explain why Queen Elizabeth became such a powerful central figure. She was unusually well suited to the mythology, not because she displayed evidence of being non-human, but because monarchy already contains many features that conspiracy storytelling can reinterpret. Royalty is hereditary. It is organized around bloodline by definition. Its ceremonies use ancient symbols. Its residences contain rooms the public never enters. Its members participate in rituals that are old, formal, and unfamiliar to most viewers. The institution maintains archives, protocol, private correspondence, security, and controlled access. The monarch is simultaneously visible everywhere and personally known by almost no one. Elizabeth intensified all of those qualities simply by reigning for so long. She became queen in 1952 at the age of 25 and remained on the throne until 2022. Over 7 decades, governments changed, prime ministers came and went, wars began and ended, currencies changed, the British Empire transformed into a very different commonwealth, television became the internet, and generations grew old. Yet the same face remained on coins, stamps, official portraits, broadcasts, state ceremonies, and public institutions. For ordinary political analysis, that continuity is constitutional and symbolic. For conspiratorial imagination, it can look almost supernatural. The Queen was also one of the most photographed people in the world, yet her public image was highly controlled by the nature of monarchy itself. Official appearances were planned. Access was limited. Public statements were carefully framed. Even her emotions were usually presented through a culture of restraint. The National Portrait Gallery has documented how her image evolved from glamorous young sovereign to mother, institution, celebrity, and symbol of continuity. That long history of representation created a peculiar effect. People felt deeply familiar with a person they did not actually know. That distance is fertile territory for projection. When a public figure reveals little private emotion, audiences can fill the silence with whatever story they already believe. Admirers see discipline and service. Critics see privilege and insulation. Satirists see stiffness. Conspiracy communities can see concealment. None of these interpretations proves anything about biology, but they explain why the same theory attached more easily to a monarch than it would to an ordinary accountant or teacher. A conspiracy needs a character who already seems larger than normal life. Elizabeth was not only a person in the public imagination, she was also a symbol of institution, inheritance, continuity, hierarchy, and secrecy. There is another reason the royal version spread so efficiently: Princess Diana. Diana's death in Paris in 1997 generated an enormous ecosystem of conspiracy theories. Official investigations ultimately concluded that the crash resulted from a combination of factors, including the actions of the driver and pursuing photographers, but public suspicion remained intense. The conflict between Diana and parts of the royal establishment, the secrecy associated with monarchy, the emotional shock of her death, and the later circulation of competing claims created ideal conditions for alternative explanations. Icke incorporated Diana into The Biggest Secret. The alleged statements attributed to Christine Fitzgerald allowed the reptilian framework to attach itself to a figure whose relationship with the royal family already carried genuine public tension. This gave the theory something it had previously lacked: emotional intimacy. Instead of an abstract story about alien bloodlines, the mythology could now be told as though Diana herself had seen behind the curtain. But again, the evidentiary chain is weak. There is no independently verified record demonstrating that Diana believed Queen Elizabeth was literally a shape-shifting extraterrestrial. There is no authenticated diary entry saying so. There is no confirmed interview. The story survives because it is narratively powerful, not because the evidence became stronger. This distinction is easy to lose on the internet. Once a claim is compressed into a meme, the chain of attribution disappears. Icke says Fitzgerald told him Diana used a particular nickname, becomes Diana said the royals are reptiles. Then Diana said the royals are reptiles becomes Diana discovered the royal reptilian secret. Finally, the original uncertainty vanishes completely, and a third-hand story is remembered as a documented fact. The Internet did not invent the reptilian queen. It perfected her. Early web forums allowed different conspiracy communities to exchange material without needing publishers, editors, television producers, or established organizations. A UFO researcher could borrow from an occult forum. A New World Order writer could borrow from alien abduction literature. A royal conspiracy could absorb ancient astronauts. A badly compressed video could be treated as physical evidence. A symbol from a palace ceremony could be placed next to an unrelated mythological image. Every new connection made the theory feel larger, even when the underlying evidence remained unchanged. Digital video created an especially effective form of apparent proof. Reptilian compilation videos began isolating moments when a politician's eyes looked unusual. A face distorted during compression, a shadow moved across skin, or a frame changed as the camera encoded motion, in some cases involving public figures. Fact-checkers have traced supposedly reptilian features to ordinary objects, edited images, or manipulated footage. The broader pattern is important. Once viewers expect a hidden reptile, almost any visual imperfection can be interpreted as the disguise failing. This is a classic self-sealing feature. Clear footage proves the disguise works. Distorted footage proves the disguise failed. The absence of evidence proves the conspiracy is good at hiding. A witness who speaks proves the truth is leaking. A witness who does not speak proves people are afraid. Every possible outcome can be absorbed. At that point, the theory is no longer operating like a scientific hypothesis. A scientific claim must expose itself to the possibility of being wrong. There must be some observation that could count against it. The reptilian theory instead tends to move the decisive evidence one step beyond whatever is available. If no reptilian anatomy is found, the beings are interdimensional. If no transformation is recorded clearly, the change occurs beyond normal perception. If institutions reject the claim, those institutions are controlled. The lack of confirmation becomes part of the explanation for why confirmation is lacking. And yet it would still be too simple to say that everyone who repeats the theory believes it literally. Some people use reptilian language as satire. Some use it as a joke about politicians. Some share videos for entertainment. Some enjoy the aesthetic of forbidden knowledge without committing to the claim. Others appear to believe at least parts of it. A 2013 public policy polling survey of registered American voters asked whether shape-shifting reptilian people controlled the world by taking human form and gaining political power. 4% said yes, while most respondents rejected the idea. Even that result should be treated carefully. Survey answers can include joking, expressive responding, or misunderstanding, but it demonstrates how recognizable the concept had become. A theory that once sounded too bizarre even for many conspiracy circles had entered mass culture. The next question is why this particular image survived. Why reptiles? Why bloodlines? Why royal families? One answer lies in the structure of older stories about evil. Religious studies researchers have noted that Icke's reptilians resemble traditional demonic figures in several ways. They are hidden from ordinary perception. They can appear in human form. They are associated with underground spaces. They manipulate people. They corrupt society from within. They are linked with serpent imagery, which carries enormous symbolic weight in Western religious tradition. The biology is modern science fiction, but the role they play in the story is ancient. The hidden enemy is not merely powerful, it is fundamentally other. That solves a narrative problem. Human elites are complicated. They disagree. They die. Their children reject them. Institutions fragment. Alliances change, but an inhuman species can be imagined as perfectly coordinated across centuries. The theory converts messy history into intention. Events no longer happen because of conflicting interests, incompetence, economics, ideology, accident, or the unpredictable behavior of millions of people. They happen because the same hidden force is always present. Robertson offers an even stranger interpretation of why Icke's reptilian thesis developed when it did. He places it inside the history of New Age spirituality. The New Age milieu of the 1970s and 1980s often imagined humanity approaching a period of expanded consciousness, spiritual transformation, and planetary awakening. The future could be better because people were supposedly becoming more aware. But by the 1990s, that promised transformation had not obviously arrived. The world still contained war, inequality, environmental destruction, political conflict, and social anxiety. A spiritual worldview based on universal connection then faced a problem. If awakening is possible and humanity is moving toward it, why does the world remain so resistant? One answer is that humanity failed. Another is that something prevented humanity from succeeding. In Robertson's analysis, the reptilian thesis performs that second function. It creates an enemy outside ordinary humanity, powerful enough to explain why the promised transformation has been delayed. The New Age does not fail because the vision was wrong. It fails because hidden beings are manipulating human perception and institutions. That interpretation changes the entire meaning of the theory. The reptilians are not only aliens, they are an explanation for disappointment. They turn spiritual frustration into cosmic conflict. They allow believers to preserve the idea that human consciousness is fundamentally capable of transformation while locating oppression in an external force. The world feels broken not because history is chaotic, but because someone is breaking it. The enemy must be hidden because the failure is everywhere. It must be ancient because the failure has lasted for generations. It must control institutions because institutions keep reproducing the same problems. It must be non-human because the spiritual worldview does not want ordinary humanity itself to be the ultimate source of evil. And once you understand that structure, the British monarchy becomes almost inevitable as a symbol inside the story. A hereditary institution stretching backward through centuries is exactly the kind of structure a bloodline conspiracy wants. A monarch who appears above party politics is exactly the kind of figure a super conspiracy can place beyond ordinary democratic change. Ceremonies, crowns, ancient architecture, private estates, genealogies, and titles create visual continuity with the past. The theory does not need Elizabeth to do anything visibly reptilian. Her symbolic position does the work. This also explains why fact-checking individual images rarely destroys the larger belief. You can show that one strange eye is a compression artifact. You can establish that one video was edited. You can trace one quotation to an unreliable source. But the theory is not held together by one photograph. It is held together by a worldview in which every elite symbol can become evidence of the same hidden structure. There is a darker historical layer that cannot responsibly be ignored. Scholars disagree over exactly how David Icke's reptilian language should be interpreted in relation to anti-Semitism. Icke has repeatedly denied that reptilian is a code word for Jewish people, and his list of alleged reptilians has included many non-Jewish public figures, including members of the British royal family and multiple American presidents. Robertson argues that reducing the entire reptilian thesis to a disguised synonym for Jews oversimplifies the evidence, but other researchers point to serious overlap between parts of Icke's conspiratorial system and older anti-Semitic narratives. His work has discussed the Rothschild family, used material connected to the forged protocols of the Elders of Zion, and repeated motifs involving secret bloodlines, hidden financial control, ritual abuse, and the consumption or sacrifice of children. Those themes resemble older forms of demonization, including the medieval blood libel. Even when a modern storyteller insists that the villains are extraterrestrial, the narrative may still recycle a vocabulary that has historically been used against real groups of people. That history matters because conspiracy stories do not exist in a vacuum. Images can migrate. A symbol can change its label while preserving its emotional function. Secret cabal can become Illuminati. Illuminati can become reptilians. The cast changes, but the structure remains. An invisible hereditary elite controls society, manipulates institutions, harms children, owns finance, directs governments, and hides behind respectable appearances. The British royals were a powerful addition to that structure because they made the secret elite visible. You could place a photograph of Queen Elizabeth on a thumbnail. You could point to a palace. You could show a coronation. The conspiracy suddenly had a face, but the face was not evidence. That may be the most important distinction in the entire case. There are real questions about monarchy. Historians can examine imperial wealth, political influence, constitutional power, secrecy laws, access to records, colonial legacies, taxation, property, lobbying, and relationships with governments. Journalists can investigate real scandals involving royal institutions and individuals. Citizens can debate whether hereditary monarchy should exist at all. None of those questions require extraterrestrial biology. The reptilian theory can actually distract from the real, documentable questions because it converts structural power into fantasy. Instead of asking how institutions preserve influence, it asks whether the institution is controlled by shape-shifting aliens. Instead of tracing money, law, networks, and history, it traces bloodlines back to cosmic beings. The extraordinary claim is more entertaining, but it is also easier for defenders of the status quo to dismiss than serious investigation. This produces a strange inversion. The conspiracy theory promises to reveal hidden power, yet it may make hidden power harder to study by replacing political mechanisms with supernatural ones. And that brings us back to Queen Elizabeth herself. For 70 years, she occupied one of the most unusual public roles on Earth. She met generations of political leaders. She opened parliaments. She received state papers. She represented a constitutional system whose rituals stretch back centuries. She lived behind security and protocol while appearing constantly in public. She became so familiar that millions of people could recognize her silhouette instantly. None of that makes her non-human, but all of it makes her ideal, raw material for myth. After her death in 2022, the reptilian claim resurfaced almost immediately on social media. Fact-checkers again stated the obvious. There was no evidence that Elizabeth was anything other than human. Yet, the persistence of the story after her death revealed something important. The theory did not depend on her personal behavior. It had become attached to the office, the bloodline, and the idea of hidden continuity. Some posts simply transferred the mythology to later generations of the royal family. That is how folklore behaves. The character can die while the role survives. And by then the story had changed again. It had mixed with QAnon era narratives, with claims about global cabals, with manipulated celebrity videos, with pandemic misinformation, with social media aesthetics built around glitches and hidden eyes. A theory assembled in the 1990s from New Age spirituality and UFO conspiracism was now being recycled through short-form video platforms by users who often had no idea where the original claims came from. The genealogy had vanished beneath the meme, which brings us to the central question promised at the beginning. What is the real origin of the Queen Elizabeth reptilian theory? The simplest answer is David Icke's late 1990s Reptilian synthesis, especially The Biggest Secret, with royal details strengthened by unverified testimony from people such as Arizona Wilder and claims Icke attributed to Christine Fitzgerald about Princess Diana. But that answer is incomplete. The deeper origin is a chain of older ideas, subterranean civilizations from 19th century fiction and occultism, hidden masters and lost worlds from esoteric traditions, early 20th century stories about lizard people beneath cities, pulp narratives about underground beings manipulating the surface, post-war UFO culture, ancient astronaut reinterpretations of Mesopotamia, 1980s popular images of reptilian aliens disguised as humans, 1990s claims about reptoid species, underground bases, mind control, and secret governments, the satanic panic's stories of hidden ritual networks, and older conspiratorial templates about hereditary elites controlling society. Icke's achievement was not discovering one secret that all these sources independently confirmed. It was combining them into a single system. That system could explain almost anything because almost anything could be translated into its language. Ancient serpent sculpture became memory of reptilians. Royal genealogy became alien bloodline. A private institution became secret control. A human expression became a shapeshift. A symbol became confession. An unverifiable witness became insider testimony. A lack of evidence became proof of concealment. And the Queen became the perfect emblem because monarchy already looks like a bridge between modern government and ancient ritual. For the final time, it is worth separating what we know from what the theory asks us to imagine. We know Queen Elizabeth II was a documented human being, born in 1926, who became monarch in 1952 and reigned until her death in 2022. We know there is no credible evidence of reptilian anatomy, extraterrestrial genetics, or physical shape-shifting. We know the modern claim was popularized by David Icke. We know his reptilian thesis developed gradually during the 1990s, rather than appearing fully formed in his famous 1991 television interview. We know his later system borrowed and synthesized ideas already circulating in ancient astronaut literature, UFO culture, occultism, conspiracy writing, alleged personal testimony, and popular media. We also know that the most dramatic royal claims in this mythology were not verified by independent physical evidence. They came through accounts attributed to individuals whose extraordinary statements remain unsupported. The Princess Diana connection, so central to online retellings, is not a documented statement from Diana establishing literal belief in extraterrestrial reptiles. It is a claim transmitted through other people. The conventional explanation is therefore strong. Queen Elizabeth was not a reptile. The theory grew because a charismatic conspiracy writer assembled existing fringe ideas into a memorable story and attached that story to one of the most symbolically powerful families on Earth. The internet then stripped away the original uncertainty, converted testimony into facts, and generated an endless supply of visual material that believers could reinterpret. But if we stop there, one genuinely interesting question remains. Why did this particular impossible story become so durable? Not why did one person believe it? Human beings believe strange things. Not why did the internet make memes? The internet makes memes about everything. The more difficult question is why a story involving underground civilizations, ancient gods, royal bloodlines, secret rituals, aliens, spiritual awakening, political distrust, and digital glitches could remain coherent enough to survive for decades. Perhaps the answer is that the reptilian theory was never really about reptiles, not in the sense that Icke meant it metaphorically. He has repeatedly presented the beings as literal, but in the sense of what the story does for the audience. It gives a body to invisible power. It gives a face to systems that feel too large to understand. It turns bureaucracy into intention, inequality into design, historical continuity into bloodline, and alienation into aliens. That does not make the theory true. It makes the theory useful as mythology. And mythology can survive evidence that would destroy an ordinary factual claim because its job is different. It organizes fear. It simplifies complexity. It transforms uncertainty into narrative. It tells the believer that the reason the world feels difficult to explain is not because reality is complicated, but because someone is hiding the explanation. For more quiet investigations into famous mysteries, institutions, and theories that become stranger when you trace them back to their source, subscribe to Mr. Occultus. And if you want to leave a comment, answer one specific question. Do you think the reptilian theory survived because people literally believed the biology, or because the image of a hidden non-human elite gave them a simple way to describe power they already distrusted? The Queen Elizabeth reptilian theory sounds impossible because, as a biological claim, there is no credible evidence for it. But its real origin is stranger than a single absurd accusation. It is the product of more than a century of stories crossing the borders between fiction, spirituality, pseudo-history, politics, folklore, UFO culture, personal testimony, and the internet, each generation inheriting fragments from the last, rearranging them and presenting the new pattern as something ancient. By the time the theory reached Queen Elizabeth, almost none of its pieces were new. Only the crown was, and perhaps that is the detail worth remembering. The strangest thing about the reptilian queen was never what people imagined beneath the crown. It was how many older stories they managed to place inside it.